Okay. My name is Henry Dexter. I'll be the so-called Uber judge. I don't know quite what that means, but it's not a taxi judge. And these are our two principal judges. And in this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are. We're all having an identity crisis. It's all right out of the box. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute question to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. And during the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character, whatever the role that you're playing and that you assign to us will be maintained during that 20-minute Q&A. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role play. So the important things to keep in mind: the ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part will also be considered a major mistake, although you may use notes. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. So none of that comes as a surprise to you. You know all that stuff. All right. Well, you have a timer up there. If you I'm going to set it for 25 minutes, and I'll have mine set for 25, and we'll start it simultaneously. And when the timer goes off, then you've got a 5-minute cushion after that. Is it started? No. Okay, let's begin if you're ready to begin.
Okay, so today we're going to be presenting to you. We are acting as a consultancy group, with you being the board of directors at Kering, which is a global luxury conglomerate. We are going to present a solution which we believe could fundamentally transform the fur industry and, as a result, your business. So back in 2009, Vogue editor Anna Wintour proclaimed there's always a way to wear fur, and in that she was undoubtedly correct. Fur is that very rare thing on a catwalk, namely a constant feature. However, there's also a lot of controversy surrounding the use of fur.
Now, as we pointed out in our executive summary, the fur industry has always been a bastion of controversy. 95% of British citizens refuse to wear fur. And according to a recent Gallup poll, more Americans oppose fur than oppose the death penalty. Now, the public's increased frustration with the industry has manifested in several ways, including boycotts, lawsuits, and protests. Additionally, the rise of various social media platforms continues to bring awareness to this issue, as evidenced by the 64,000 signatures to ban fur from London's Fashion Week just this year. So why have we decided to approach Kering? Well, Kering is an umbrella corporation with access to multiple luxury brands, including Stella McCartney, Gucci, Alexander McQueen, and Brioni. Additionally, they have committed to a sustainability agenda that would substantially reduce their environmental footprint by the year 2025. Currently, each of Kering's brand's chief executive officers' bonuses are dependent on their ability to meet sustainability promises. And most importantly, with global ethical consumerism on the rise, the imperative to change has never been higher, and we believe that Kering could lead the way for the fashion industry. Now, the next few moments of the presentation will disprove Thomas Jefferson's observation that taste cannot be controlled by law. Wearing fur is certainly a matter of taste, and it has been subjected to numerous lawsuits over the past few years. An increasing number of countries, as we shall see, have introduced legislation against fur farming, and consequently, multiple companies have been forced to pull products that contain fur, including those that have been advertised as containing faux fur. Perhaps the most notorious case occurred in 2006 and involved P. Diddy's company, Sean. Sean was selling coats advertised as containing faux fur, but actually contained dog fur from China. This was in direct violation of the U.S. Dog and Protection Law of 2000. Now, the Sean case is anything but an isolated incident. This slide contains retailers on the left, designers and clothing lines on the right that have also been in violation of consumer protection laws for the exact same reason. So several of these companies were forced to reach settlements with the Federal Trade Commission, including, ironically, Gilt, as well as Neiman Marcus and Nordstrom Rack. The reason that this is important for our presentation is because many of these companies sell Kering products. And although the details of the lawsuits were not made public, there is a $16,000 fine per violation. So what's bad for these companies is ultimately bad for Kering and its bottom line. So as a result of these controversies, there have been numerous pieces of legislation passed over the past few years. The most important in the United States has been the Truth in Fur Labeling Act, which was signed into law by President Barack Obama in December of 2010. It stipulates that all fur must be labeled according to country and species, no matter how small the amount. And it is enforced by both the U.S. Customs and Border Protection as well as the Federal Trade Commission. Interestingly, it targets fur farmers in particular, as they have been the result of numerous environmental issues over the past few decades. So this is a problem that has been addressed for quite some time. In the early 1990s, New Jersey fined fur processors a whopping $2.2 million for the amount of water and air pollution that they were causing in that state. Much more recently, the Washington State Department of Ecology fined a single meat farmer $24,000 for polluting local waterways with hazardous materials from his fur farm. So once again, this is more incentive for Kering to find an innovative solution. We want Kering to be featured on shows like the Today Show because they are at the forefront of the fashion industry and not because they have unintentionally violated U.S. federal law, as was the case in December of 2014. Just to illustrate that the United States is not alone, we have a slide here showing the European countries that currently have legislation on the books that either prohibits or severely curtails fur farming. And I'd like to stress that although we're focusing on Europe because this is where Kering is based, multiple countries around the globe have similar laws, including Japan, Australia, and India. We believe that 2017 is a crucial turning point as the phase-out period ends for multiple countries, including Croatia and Denmark, which will no longer have fur production. So I will now turn it over to my colleague Katie, who will discuss the ethical complexity of fur production.
Thank you. So we're going to focus on two core aspects of the ethical problems surrounding fur, and I should stress that we're focusing on fur which is farmed rather than fur which is caught in the wild, because that is the vast majority of fur used in the fashion industry. So we're going to explore animal welfare and environmental issues. I'll begin with some fast facts, and then I'll go on to explore those in more detail. Presently, more than 1 billion animals are killed for their fur annually. The vast majority of those creatures are fox and mink, but also include other species like chinchilla, even grizzly bear and wolves. Most of these animals, as I've said, are factory farmed, and therefore their life expectancy is extremely short, a mere 7 months. And often, at the end of that time, many of them face inhumane killing methods. In addition, many of these creatures have very inadequate housing conditions, and oftentimes this leads to stereotypic behaviours, which in more extreme cases can induce zoochosis, which is a phenomenon pretty similar to psychosis in the human species. One crossover point between animal welfare and environmental concerns is that these fur farm productions often damage indigenous populations of animals in the region. We'll explore this later, but essentially sometimes animals escape from fur farms and go on to breed with those in the population living naturally, and that causes hybridization problems. But to focus more on the environment, I'd like to focus on the excessive water usage associated with fur farming. Presently, for mink and fox farming in the US alone, enough water is used as could provide the needs of over 3 million people every year. Also, 1,000 tons of phosphorus are released into the atmosphere every single year as a result of fur production. This can have quite devastating consequences on soil erosion and in turn could destabilize human food sources. So to focus a little more detail on the housing of these animals, 85% of animals killed for their fur are bred in farms, therefore the vast majority. The Council of Europe, which as Rivers has indicated has some stricter standards, suggests that mink cages should be no smaller than 2.7 feet squared. Now, just to put this in perspective, in the wild, mink would naturally roam a territory of 2.5 miles every single day. So if mink were to exercise to the sufficient degree in captivity, it would mean they'd need to circulate their cage a whopping 1,822 times every single day. Also, focusing on mink, but this is a common feature for many animals proportionate to their size and their cage size. So that's a very common feature. And despite being semi-aquatic, mink rarely have access to swimming water in captivity. This has been shown to have very significant effects on their mental health, essentially. All this indicates that there are both physical as well as psychological traumas experienced by fur-farmed animals. High levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, have been detected in farmed animals, and oftentimes they'll display stereotypic behaviours indicative of very poor substandard welfare, including such things as self-mutilation, pacing the cage constantly, and returning to the nest box. Because animals bred for fur have been selectively bred in order to get more fur from them, obesity is an issue. Obviously, the larger the animal, the more fur yielded. So obesity and a range of health problems which follow from it are common on farms. Some of those include infection and disease, but in association with the stereotypic behaviours, we have heightened levels of aggression towards other members of their own species, and often even cases of infanticide towards their offspring. Having said all that, I want now to focus on why we're focusing on fur-bearing animals as opposed to other kinds of farmed animals, and what are the unique welfare concerns for fur-bearing animals. So fur-bearing animals have been bred in captivity for just 90 years. When we contrast that with other domesticated farmed animals, such as pigs or horses or sheep, goats, etc., which have been bred in captivity and domesticated for 5,000 years, the contrast is extremely stark. And to put a percentage on this, we should note that fur-bearing animals have been domesticated for only 1.8% of the time of other farmed creatures. Essentially, therefore, fur-bearing animals are wild, and every time they encounter humans on a daily basis, experience shock and fear and anxiety. A further point of comparison between animals bred for fur and animals bred for food, for example, is that here in the US, fur-bearing animals have no protection under the Federal Animal Welfare Act. So I want to contextualise this quote, which is taken from the leading scientific journal, Nature. Experiments and observations have been done on mink who are deprived of water for swimming and mink who are deprived of food. And it's been concluded that both times they have the same amount of stress in either case. So if you take away the opportunity for swimming or if you take away the opportunity for feeding, it has just as significant effect on the welfare of mink. The author writes, Animals may suffer in captivity if they are strongly motivated to perform activities that their housing does not permit. We have objectively investigated this issue of deprivation. So I'm going to focus, not for too long, on the death of animals in fur farms, but it is an important point. Currently, there's no federal regulation on how fur-bearing animals are to be killed on farms. But New York is unique in that it has prohibited the use of electrocution as a method for killing fur-bearing animals. Whilst it has prohibited that, it's very uncertain whether and how that is being successfully enforced. But globally, the regulations vary considerably, where in Europe, as Rivers highlighted earlier, the standards are considerably stricter, but in Asia there are virtually no regulations. So there's a great deal of diversity experienced by these fur-bearing animals. However, the most common ways of killing include electrocution, outside the state of New York, of course, and gassing with CO2. Unfortunately, however, it's very often the case that sometimes these minks or fox will be gassed, but insufficient amounts of CO2 will be administered to actually kill them. Instead, it will just render them unconscious. And regrettably, therefore, skinning alive, as horrific as that sounds, is a common practice. So leaving aside the concerns of animal welfare, we're turning now to look at the environmental impacts of fur production. Escapees from fur farms, so when a mink manages to bite through the mesh of its cage, when they escape, sometimes they can become invasive species in an area, and that can have negative effects on the whole ecological system. They can breed with populations of wild mink who don't have the same genetic selection of the domesticated kind. In Wisconsin, a recent survey of the population of mink found that 81% were either themselves descended from or were themselves hybrid species. So they had come from fur farming at one point in their background. And as I mentioned before, we've got all the issues associated with phosphorus and with water pollution and excessive water consumption. All of that has very serious impacts potentially on public health concerns. Whilst the fur industry itself likes to push the idea that as a biodegradable product, fur is a green option, in fact, that's not the case when you examine the toxicity of the industry as a whole. And as this graph demonstrates, and we only have time here to explore one environmental indicator, so we've chosen to focus on the kilograms of CO2 emitted by textile type, but there are other things we could explore. We can see that in comparison with wool and polyester, cottons and acrylics, and different kinds of products that are used in the fashion industry, mink fur is by far off the scale in comparison with those. So, having quickly run through some of the key points that are ethically problematic about the production of fur, I'm going to turn over to Harshmina, who will present our proposed solution.
Thank you. So what are we going to do about all the ethical issues which Katie has highlighted? Well, we want to share our scientific knowledge, technological capability and vision, such that the fur industry remains financially lucrative but becomes ethically viable. Our proposal is in line with Kering's 2025 Ethical Environmental Sustainability Goals, and we believe that we hold the key to delivering high quality, cruelty-free and environmentally sustainable fur. And we are proposing doing this via the use of stem cells. So first of all, what are stem cells? Well, without complicating the story too much, stem cells are simply cells with three key properties. Firstly, they are unspecialized cells, meaning they do not belong to any of the approximately 200 different cell types that make up the human or animal body. Secondly, they have the capacity for self-renewal. This means that they have the ability to maintain their populations by dividing almost indefinitely. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, they have the capacity for differentiation. And this means that these cells have the ability to turn into any of the approximately 200 cell types that make up the human or animal body. Now, whilst it is known that stem cells typically come from adult or embryonic stem cells meet the aforementioned criteria. However, they themselves are associated with numerous ethical issues, namely the potential destruction of life, making their use and therefore association with caring highly questionable. And it is for this reason that we are suggesting use from an alternative source. Thanks to the 2012 Nobel laureate in Physiology and Medicine, Professor Yamanaka from the University of Kyoto, it is now possible to transform regular adult cells into cells with stem cell-like characteristics, and these are called induced pluripotent stem cells, or IBECCs. Now, his team in 2007 found that only a few of the proteins, of the thousands of proteins encoded by the genome, are required to induce these characteristics. And these cells have no ethical issues associated with them. They have the indefinite replication potential required, but most importantly, they have pluripotency, or the ability to differentiate into any cell type. And we believe that it is this technology which will trigger what we are calling a reformation. So how are we going to do this? Well, we have decided to simplify this into a 3-step protocol based on current literature. So the first thing we need to do is to obtain a 2mm skin biopsy sample from an animal of interest, where mink, being so commonly used across the fur industry, is a good starting place. A topical anesthetic such as lidocaine can be applied to minimize distress caused upon the animal. And a 2mm sample is small enough to extract large numbers of fibroblasts whilst not requiring stitches for the animal. And this process of fibroblast extraction should take approximately 3 weeks, and it should be emphasized that fibroblasts are merely skin cells normally required for structural framework. So once you have your fibroblast culture, the second thing we need to do is to generate these stem cells, these iPSCs. And as I've mentioned previously, only a few proteins are required to induce these characteristics. So all we need to do is to reintroduce extra copies of these proteins using viral technology. And such reprogramming should take approximately 1 month. Now, the final part of this process is the differentiation process. Now, it should be noted that the first 2 steps are widely performed amongst the scientific community and are routine procedures. However, this differentiation protocol will need to be optimized, and you may see animal-to-animal variation. However, based on current literature, we propose the following. You need to differentiate these cells into what we call epithelial stem cells. And these are cells located near the bottom of the hair shaft and are responsible for the hair follicle growth itself, as well as layers of the epidermis which hold the hair in place. And this should take approximately 6 weeks. Now, it should be emphasized that our proposed solution requires 1 animal per species. The animal experiences minimal to no distress, and there is no animal death involved. Now, just for proof of concept, this 2014 publication in Nature Communications, as well as this 2015 publication in PLOS ONE, show just this. They used variations of the aforementioned technique to differentiate epithelial stem cells into hair follicles, indicated by the arrows. And this shows that this is not merely science fiction, but a realistic solution for caring. So I'll now move on to why we have decided to approach caring. How could caring make a difference? Well, there are 3 key reasons we believe caring is in an ideal position to transform the fur industry. Firstly, being a multi-billion euro company, valued at over 10 billion euros in 2014, you're in an ideal position to transform the industry. And this is evidenced by the fact that you have managed to resurrect share prices by over 800% since the financial crisis. Second of all, you are a global luxury conglomerate and you have access to numerous luxury subsidiaries, specialising in jewellery, sports, but most importantly, clothing, a sector which makes up over half of Kering's daughter companies. Now, all of Kering's daughter companies specialising in luxury clothing sell fur in some form or another, where interestingly, some of your subsidiaries are already seeking alternatives. And this is probably emphasised by looking at Stella McCartney, whose fur-free fur line is probably the most famous. And she is a designer who has always abstained from using animal products in her textiles, be it in the form of fur or leather. So Kering is in an ideal position to transform the industry, again, due to the sheer array of brands that you are parent to. And finally, ethics and environmental sustainability are already beginning to shape your agenda. And this is evidenced by a recent investment into local python farming and cashmere sourcing. Whilst these solutions have not always adequately addressed issues regarding animal welfare, it is definitely the first step in the right direction, and we hope that we can help push this one step further and spark a reformation. So I'm now going to move on to a bit about the financial viability of our solution. So we propose an initial investment of approximately 11 million euros will be required, and this will cover the core labour force as well as fundamental equipment such as basic cell culture equipment. After which, investment will fall to and stabilise to approximately 5 million euros a year, or a burst of investment may be required should you decide to upgrade your technology or expand your species range. Now, we predict that once the technology has been optimised, in vitro fur sales will increase in conjunction with a decrease in conventional fur sales.
Now, just to break this down a bit further, it currently costs roughly 40 euros to produce a single mink pelt, including housing and husbandry costs. And it takes 60 of these to make a single coat. Consequently, it costs Kering roughly 2,400 euros using the old-fashioned method to create a single coat. However, by using our state-of-the-art bioreactor stem cell production process, you could cut these costs by 20% and create a coat that costs only 2,000 euros to create. Ultimately, you end up with the same ultra-luxury product, minus the legal hassles, ethical issues, and protests. And just to give you an idea of what the final product might look like, we have included a coat that is currently retailing on Gucci's website for $56,000, or roughly the cost of one bioreactor. The reason that this is important is because Gucci currently accounts for 52% of Kering's total profits from last year, and the numbers from last quarter indicate that Gucci's influence is only continuing to rise. And of course, we would like to stress the legality of our solution. And just to use the UK as an example, we will take a look at their import laws. So import laws often pertain to the methods used to create the end product. In the UK, it is illegal to import fur that is the end result of leg traps or other methods that do not meet international standards of humane trapping. Consequently, coats made of badgers, bobcats, lynx, otters, coyotes, and multiple other species are not currently allowed in the United Kingdom. However, this would not apply to products that are created via the reformation process, as they are grown ethically inside of a laboratory setting. Once again, at this point, we would just like to stress that this illustrates that numerous countries are phasing out fur and banning it altogether in some cases. So Kering would be on the wrong side of history not to invest in this process. And very briefly, we would like to talk about what we would do with regards to patenting. Initially, we would be patenting the general protocol, or as Harshmeen explained, the differentiation of the stem cell production process. Secondly, we would patent the specific growth factors, which could in the future be used for other products, including leather and suede. And lastly, we would trademark a unique logo that would blatantly distinguish reformation products from other luxury fur products. We would also encourage Kering to create a certificate of verification to differentiate between our products and actual fur.
So to conclude, our proposal would enable Kering to take animals out of the fur industry and thereby resolve a host of environmental and animal welfare concerns. Kering could continue to provide its customers with the state-of-the-art are luxury products that they have become accustomed to. Our proposal is financially lucrative, but perhaps most important, in accordance with Kering's 2025 sustainability agenda. Kering would show its customers that it is also caring.
So we as the board of Kering need to respond to this. One of the things that wasn't completely clear to me is, can we really do the patenting that you're suggesting? Or is this a wide open process since it's been published already in journals and so on? Can we take possession of this technology by patent?
So you're not allowed to patent stem cells themselves, but what you can patent is the chemical composition, and this is the third component of our protocol, the differentiation process. So to differentiate your cells, you need to add growth factors, numerous growth factors, in various combinations for different periods of time. And that's the process that you can patent, because no one else will have that technology. Currently no one knows this information, and it would be Kering scientists who would figure this out during the optimization period.
So you're basically saying there's no other competitor out there right now that has thought of this?
Unbelievably, Kering would be the first company to pave the way forward using stem cells to generate fur. No one is currently doing this in the fashion industry, and as far as we are aware, there are currently no patents on this. So this would give Kering an opportunity to lead the way forward and not simply follow.
So how is that, why would I be convinced to invest in this? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to be fast. So why do they think that they will have fur to make a fur coat by doing this processing?
So can I clarify, the question is, why do you think this will work?
And why would the investors be interested in this? I assume that Kering has already some investors in other things they're doing, but why would they want Kering to, why would they believe that this is going to work?
So the reason we decided to address fur was for numerous reasons, but one of the reasons was because there's already a foundation bed of literature looking at hair follicle growth. And this is because stem cell technology is currently used for regenerative medicine, and primarily the regenerative growth of hair for balding. And so this would give us a solid foundation upon which we can build. And in all honesty, there is very little difference between growing human hair and animal hair. So there is a solid foundation upon which we can start. Not to mention that fur is highly lucrative, and so you're more likely to break even on your investment than if you were to invest in products such as leather, for example.
Additionally, from a publicity standpoint, it makes sense for Kering to do this. And even if the process does take some time, it would still be completed by their 2025 goal.
I'd also like to add that in terms of, from the perspective of investors, what they have to think about is the long term for their company's progression. And given, as Rivers has highlighted, given the trend, the global trajectory away from fur and towards banning fur and making it actually illegal to sell and produce conventional fur, Kering needs to start thinking now, give itself time, so that when those bans come into place at a global level, they will have an alternative and continue to supply their customers with what is ultimately a desirable and highly lucrative product.
We would also like to emphasize that although 11 million euros sounds like a lot, it's ultimately a drop in the bucket for Kering. It's 0.1% of their profits from last year.
I'm a board member who is a banker, actually. I don't know much about biology, and I don't know much about this process of creating the conditions for the growth of fur. So I'm trying to understand what the output of the process is. Is it one strand of fur, and we have to, how many of those does it take to make a coat?
So we are proposing the use of bioreactors, and these are simply mass cultivating cell culture, which we use in industry. And this would allow you to grow a bed of fur, depending on the size of your bioreactor. So we are proposing the use of a smaller scale production whilst you're optimizing the growth factors, the conditions, the environment. However, once you've perfected this, you can upscale. Bioreactors, I should emphasize, range from 2 liters to 15,000 liters. So this is most definitely viable.
We could, in principle, have the entire coat.
In principle. But your furriers and tailors would still be required to turn this textile into a product.
So so my background's in change management. So from a change management perspective, do you feel that Caring has the culture and the receptiveness to take this avenue to try this type of innovation?
I believe it does. Caring has a number of occasions it has tried to make a difference not only to the lives of animals but to its employees as well. It's already investing in local cashmere sourcing. It's opened up its own python farming in parts of Indonesia. And what it's really committed to is to try and make their business more sustainable, because they're very much aware that ethical consumerism is on the rise and that customers want to have a clean conscience when they're purchasing these luxury products. So I would say that Caring as an organisation is certainly receptive to these things. Having said that, at the moment, only 38% of the fur which Caring uses is recognised as from a sustainable source. That's in contrast with the 91% of crocodile skins which Caring produces and sells. So there's clearly a need to move the fur part of their business towards a more sustainable solution.
Why do you think they haven't so far? Why do you think we haven't so far?
Yeah, I think that part of that is because there's so much variation, and there's also a lot of there's very little evidence about where they obtain their furs from. Part of the problem is that because animals bred for fur, so they have many health problems, the stereotypic behaviours, sometimes a so-called yield or harvest of fur can fail, and in that instance Caring needs to quickly find an alternative supplier. That is part of the problem, which is why it moves from farmer to farmer looking for its fur and not always finding the most sustainable source. However, our solution would be a more reliable product. You'd get a more reliable level of fur without mutilated creatures or without bite marks or destructive habits that these creatures perform upon themselves due to stress.
Explain to me what is python farm and how did they do this? I mean,
Okay.
you're talking a lot about that, but I don't.
Okay, so python farming is somewhat similar to mink farming in that they breed pythons and then obtain the skins from them. They have plants or farms doing that in parts of Asia, and they've recently invested in those because aside from the animal welfare issues associated with skinning pythons, the reason they've moved towards farming rather than capturing pythons in the wild is that those populations are on the decline and they are verging towards becoming more and more endangered.
And the one that Caring has publicized the most is in Thailand, and it technically belongs to its subsidiary, Gucci.
And I heard you say, maybe I misheard, that there were other sustainable methods of obtaining fur, besides the ones that you described as not sustainable. What would those be?
Some of those, well, to begin with, there are some standards which are, well, there's variation from farm to farm. So those things are measured on such things as the amount of toxicity which that farm produces and the amount of chemicals released from that particular farm, how many animals are killed on that farm, and how many escapees are there from that farm. So are they breeding with different species? So there are more and less sustainable ways of conventional fur production. However, the sheer fact that there are such strict regulations in part of Europe indicates, I think, that there is a clear problem that needs to be regulated. And at the same time as all of that, even where fur farming might be more environmentally sustainable, they still have the problems surrounding the environment, the animal welfare issues.
And do you think that this fur produced in 2025 will be as expensive as the real fur now? Will they make as much money as we?
So using our stem cell bioreactor process, our numbers show that you can actually initially make fur for 20% less. However, because it is an ultra luxury product and you can market it through means of ethical consumerism, you can add an ultra luxury price tag, and we would be happy to work with Kerin's subsidiaries to work out the fine details.
I need to drop out of character now.
More questions in character?
More out, actually, so I'm just waiting.
Well, I stay in character just a little bit here. This sounds too good to be true, and I'm paid big bucks on the board in order to be skeptical. Is it the case that you're saying we can produce more fur for less and sell it for still higher margins? Is this, what is the risk to our company? What's the downside if this plan that you've outlined for us does not succeed for some reason?
So I think that, first of all, it should be emphasized that Kering, simply by marketing that it is trying, would gain publicity in its favor. Secondly, it should be emphasized that having worked with stem cells on a regular basis, I could personally oversee the first two steps and probably even do them myself. What was the third part of your question? Oh, the downfall. So, stem cells aren't used routinely amongst the fashion industry, and that's because it's a field, even amongst the scientific community, that's in its infancy. This isn't to say that it is not going to work, as we wouldn't have brought the proposal to Kering if we thought this was the case. There is clearly proof of concept amongst the literature which shows that you would just simply be ahead of the curve.
And add to that, if I may, that it's interesting to focus on the risks, and that's completely natural. And whilst you can focus on the risks of our proposal failing, you can also focus on the risks of not enacting change. So with the trajectory, the way things are set, the fur industry has, is the ticking time bomb, because more and more consumers are getting more and more worried about the impact of conventional fur production. So whilst it's true to acknowledge there may be some risks, it might take longer, it might take less time than we're expecting to actually get an in vitro fur coat out at the end of this process. I'd like to focus on the risks of not changing.
And it should be emphasized that during the time in which you are optimizing these procedures, you will be selling conventional fur. We are proposing a phase-out period.
And what are they going to do with the fur which are now in the world? Are they going to throw them away, which is wasting it? I know there was a time when people were rabbit fur, and a lot of people in the world do eat rabbit, and so throwing away oh, this is like a waste. I mean, we already have so much waste. So what is the proposal about what's now?
So the animals that are currently on Kering's fur farms will have the potential to be utilised. As I mentioned, we would propose a phase-out period. So we could utilise the animals that are already captive in Kering's fur farms. With regards to the idea of using rabbit fur, I think that in itself is an ethical issue which needs to be addressed separately.
No, I'm talking about the fur coats which are already in the world. And I'm sure there are a lot of them. So what do you propose to do with them once you make this new fur?
Well, from that point of view, it comes down to consumer choice. Once you've bought a coat, it's entirely up to you. It's within your rights to decide if you remain comfortable wearing that fur. So I would say it's completely in the hands of the consumer. But in addition, once the fur coat has been made, the amount of toxicity it is going to have emitted is done and dusted. You're not going to have more toxicity or more environmental impact from continuing to wear that coat. So I'd say once the end product is there, it's up to the consumer if they want to keep wearing it. And Kering, we've sold these coats. We still think that those coats are beautiful fashion items. That's why we sold them in the first place. That's why Kering sold them.
So ultimately, Kering's customers are looking to pay for a clear conscience. But regardless, they could keep their old coats and still have the Kering distinguished with the reformation.
I can just see the tremendous amount of partnership with PETA and other organizations. They have a lot of celebrity power, a lot of reach across the world, and so I can see their opportunity to open up the market space.
Absolutely. At the moment, the consumer base of Kering is, a certain amount of people, but you could expand that to the millionaires willing to invest £60,000 in an in vitro coat, who are, perhaps vegan, perhaps vegetarian, perhaps meat eaters who just don't feel comfortable with wearing fur. As Rivers mentioned, more people in America currently oppose the use of fur than the death penalty. So you could really expand the market here. And in addition, there are some animals, such as endangered species like tigers or lions or snow leopards, who at the moment it's completely illegal to have a fur coat from a tiger, for good reason as well. But if all that was required was a 2mm skin biopsy, there's nothing stopping you producing a tiger coat.
Yeah, in addition to partnering with perhaps PETA, we could partner with zoos or with conservationists who track these animals. And
these schools,
I have one more question. Can you tell me how big this farm are right now? The meat farm or the other farm, are they huge?
Yeah,
Are they big business or are they mom and pop? Like let's say somewhere in small countries where
there have been mom and pop in small countries and in Europe, but these are increasingly being phased out because they're now requiring that they are much bigger. Currently, they're not. But as Katie mentioned, mink are semi-aquatic, so a lot of the laws in Europe stipulate that you not only have to have a large amount of land, but also water for them to swim in, making it economically impossible for them to sustain these farms anymore.
So most of these farms are large-scale industrial farms.
One last thing.
Yeah.
Can you tell me your name? I know that Casey.
it's hard to
Casey, yeah. I didn't. Yeah. So,
Katie, I'm Katie.
You Katie?
Hashmina.
Ashmina?
Rivers.
Rivers?
Okay, I think we can stop the Q&A part that, okay. And now we'll step out of our roles and offer some feedback on your presentation in general content as well as
I'm glad to be out there. I was like biting my tongue. So first off, you just blew my mind. That was beyond brilliant and fabulous, and I'm so happy and proud that you guys took the steps to do what you did. I think it's bold, I think it's innovative, I think it's creative, and I have no idea why Kering's not talking to you right now about this. And so just a challenge to you is that if I were you, I would try and get in front of Caring's board or PETA or other organizations, and I would say, hey, we're part of this international competition, and we have something to say. So don't be shy to take that step. It's something that I did. I was a contestant back in 2006, and I since then have taken this opportunity to talk about my experience in interviews and even now with my clients and otherwise. And so conceptually, I'm like, why did we think of this earlier? Of course, we're doing stem cell everywhere else in the world. It's technology that we can now lean on, and that it's financially makes sense. It doesn't hurt the customer to pay less money for something that's more ethically sound. And I just think you guys did a fabulous job. So in terms of delivery, I felt that all three of you have a very different personality, and that really showed in a very good way. So it's very unique delivery. I felt that your toning, volume, and articulation were on point. And I appreciated that you obviously practiced this enough that you did not need, like flashcards and other things to read off of. You were just able to sort of bounce off of each other in the slides. And so it showed a certain level of preparation and polish that I appreciated. I honestly don't have very much criticism. Maybe presentation-wise, there was a turning point right before the recommendation part where I would have maybe said things slightly differently. I would have said, now that we know all of this, for example, think about what we now do in stem cell. Think of what we now do for hair regrowth. Because it took me a while to make the connection of what we're trying to propose. And so if you were to kind of switch the story real quick and maybe flash something of stem cells currently being used in human hair growth, and then make the direct connection, I think it would have immediately made the recommendation obvious. So, and I could go on.
This is my first time, so I really, I did like your presentation. And like you said, you have three different personalities, and you were able to, each one of you was able to say something. I like that. And that's all I can say for now.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed the presentation very much, and it is innovative and bold. We've come to look for that for lots of, growing meat, I think, was one of the subjects in previous years. But to your presentation, the ethical dimension of the argument, I think, could benefit from a little more highlighting in terms of what's the logic of the ethical dimension. And what I took away that was that slide that had animal welfare and environment intersecting, and implying to me, at least as a viewer, that those are two principles that you hold to be important ethical principles. Both of them have, I suppose, their limits. There's ways of arguing against animal welfare when it comes to sparing human beings, unless welfare just means pain and suffering. But if it means taking the life of an animal, then there's going to be that ethical principle needs to be balanced by something, and just a little more explicitness about the moral pillars of your presentation would have made it a little more persuasive to me. I mean, I'm persuaded, frankly, but since this is an ethics competition, I would expect you not to be talking about teleology and deontology and all those nasty words that are forbidden, but to be talking about principles of this or principles of that, and what limits those principles might have, I think would shore up the ethical side of the presentation. But in general, I thought the presentation was wonderful, and I hope Karen takes you up on it, and I
about Caring's culture and readiness and being receptive was because companies in this area are blind, I think, to ethics because they're looking at the bottom line, they're looking at the dollar, and they're saying, we're in this business for a reason. We chose to be, in this business. We understand that there's the money side to it, and we understand that there's the financial side to it. And obviously, there are consumers out there in the world who don't have a problem with animals being electrocuted, or they're not aware of where their clothes come from. So, to your point, I believe that if you were to, unfortunately, make the gory, in some shape or form, obvious, maybe it's a visual, maybe it's just being right out there and saying, you're skinning something alive, that your point that you made, that you're skinning them alive when they're just knocked out, essentially, that hit home for me.
Yeah, we thought about including an image of that kind, and we played with that idea, but it was so horrific.
It's horrible.
That when we saw it, we thought we don't want to detract from our solution. So I agree that those images certainly do bring home the ethical problem that is so much a part of the fur industry, but sometimes they can be a bit depressing as well.
Interestingly, last year I wasn't here, but these two were, and they were dissuaded from using type of language, like barbaric activities, and putting those kinds of things.
So that's just my personal opinion, then disregard. But in terms of the competition, I can see that, I think you all took the right approach. But if I truly were the board, I think I would want to see other things. So it's just kind of hard to balance that, because we are in a competition talking about ethics. You do want to talk about the pillars and what that looks like. And at the same time, I'm in my business mindset, so I'm thinking about how it would land hypothetically.
Do you have any questions for us?
We're okay. I don't think so.
Thank you very much for your feedback and comments.
Thank you.
And when are you going to Caring?
After the semester's over.
What's your relation to it?
I'm married husband.
Oh, you're the husband. Would you be so bold as to send them an email and say, my team participated in this competition?
We could try. There's no harm in trying.
Yeah, I would hit up their marketing team. I would, and I would go through. They're ready for it. So
Okay.
Go to their marketing team. Go to their outfit. Hit up all their officers basically, and say, hey officers, you guys are supposed to be cool and open-minded. Check us out. We went to this competition. Got good feedback. Give us 20 minutes of your time. Send them a little packet thingy.
It seems to me that there's a general moral principle here that's in the background and brought it to the foreground somewhat, but I think you could, and the principle is that given modern life and modern technology, modern science, we can do things now that we couldn't do before, and we had to sort of ethically settle for less. I'm thinking of blood diamonds and the cloning of diamonds and that whole, we're not dealing with living things here, but you are dealing with new methods of creating things that the old methods had moral downside to. And of course, the example you're talking about, that there must be a dozen other examples of the same principle, which is using technology to improve the moral viability of the means to an end, instead of sacrificing the end entirely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, blood diamonds often came to my mind when we were working on this, and I kept thinking about the failure of the Kimberley process and the fact that people will pay more to have a diamond that contains a certificate of authenticity from Canada because they know it doesn't have any value.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe you open a presentation like that, that viewpoint to say, just as, the world has opened their mind towards blood diamonds and other things, by the way, we've been growing human hair. By the way, why can't we do that with jackets? By the way, check us out. This is what we've done. So I think if you were to prep it that way and serve it that way, I think people would be like, what? Because it's not something that a lot of folks have thought about. So.
Nice work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Judges can have some time to work on their forms.
I think I might need to fill mine out later because I have to go back to that all day.
Oh, really? Okay, well, it's,
But I can turn it in the front, they said. Settlement?
well, maybe you could find, I'll keep this for all day.
Okay,
So
perfect.
if you can get it to me.
Sure.
Then I